course, at the same time, ANC Youth League President Collen Malatjie says young people should make up 50% of ANC representation in the National Assembly and in the provincial legislature. He was speaking during a media briefing earlier following an ANC Youth League elective conference at the weekend. Political analyst Lukhona Mnguni joins us now for more. When we look at history, Lukhona, in as far as the late Rolihlahla Nelson Mandela was in the ANC Youth League, in his time, he was also a very radical voice with very radical ideologies, if you will. But there wasn't so much a pushback, if you will, during those times because of the nature of how things were in South Africa. Present day, this is a different South Africa. These are young people still with the same voice, but they are, I imagine, are going to experience a pushback from the elders if they're wanting to occupy half of those seats.
Well, William, I think there's always been an interesting intergenerational, we call it battle within the ANC since the formation of the ANC Youth League itself. And as you are saying, the radical ideas were always there, intellectually radical, so putting pen to paper.
Sure.
And I hope we will see some aspects of that, so that it's not in the contemporary time a rhetoric that is radical, but it's actually intellectual. I mean, if you read the writings of Anton Lembede, for example, the founding president of the ANC Youth League, you are really immersed in intellectual rigor about all forms of society and what makes up society. Whether he was writing about agriculture, or he was writing about religion, or he was writing about identity, but he would take you at depth and to a journey. Of course, in the 1948 conference, 4 years after the formation of the Youth League, there is then a fallout with the president that allowed the ANC Youth League to be formed, and that was A.B. Xuma, Dr. A.B. Xuma, and that is how Dr. Moroka becomes the president of the ANC, because there's such difference between Xuma and the Youth League of that time that the Youth League actually goes out in the night to procure Dr. Moroka as a presidential candidate, and they secure him, and they secure him as president of the ANC going forward. So the difference here, I think, I would say, that ANC Youth League of the 1940s could shape the ANC. This ANC of 2023 is fighting for a space within the ANC, and that for me is the big difference.
It's almost like a snake eating its own tail, if you want to use that analogy, right? Literally hurting yourself for the cause. Let's talk about the elected members, the president, the deputy president, the 40-plus NEC members. What does that picture look like going into the elections next year?
Well, look, I think that the president, of course, has led in lower, organizations of the ANC or COSAS and all of that. I think Collen is not new necessarily to the discourse of the ANC Youth League politics. He's been a member probably since he qualified to be at 14.
Sure.
And, I was speaking to someone at the Congress yesterday, just on the conference floor, and they were saying, no, we identified him when he was in grade 11, that one day he could be a president of the Youth League. So you can imagine that then early. The earliness of it, the investment in ensuring and shaping him to be the president of the Youth League. But it's one thing to shape him for internal purposes of the Youth League. It's another whether or not he'll then find resonance with young people outside of the ANC in society. Will he preoccupy himself with internal political battles, or will he preoccupy himself with being outward-looking and trying to be a voice in society? A voice that has been absent of the Youth League, to tell you the truth, because the Youth League for the last 11 years has been bogged down into internal issues since the disciplinary proceedings of the likes of your Julius Malemas and Floyd Shivambus and your Sindiso Makakas, your Ronald Lamulas, and in their generation when, the things collapsed. Of course, your Ronald Lamula retreated and remade himself outside of the Youth League politics. Most of his colleagues left. He and Sindiso Makakas remained within the ANC and were sort of coming up. Unfortunately, Sindiso Makakas was killed. So what does that era of 11 years ago in terms of the repercussions that can come about if you disagree with the mother body leadership, or at least the top 6 now, top 7?
Yes.
And therefore, how will that shape Collen Malatjie's constructive tension with the mother body? How will he be able to criticize the ANC on behalf of young people in society, but still be trusted by the ANC that he can go out and mine young people to vote for the ANC in the 2024 election. It's going to be a tough balancing act because there's been such a vacuum in leadership within the ANC Youth League, and he almost has somewhat of a blank slate, not even being called. We can't even remember the Collen Mnguni that was president of the ANC elected in 2015 because there's been such a great vacuum. And therefore, I think he has a blank slate. He can shape it how he wishes as the president with his leadership collective assisting him, or it can eventually become a borrowed slate that is shaped elsewhere, not by him, which would be probably his biggest headache.
But I imagine it will be a tough ask for a youth league that has been absent to try and now galvanize young people to go to the polls on behalf of their manifesto and whatever they tell them, in as far as the messaging within the party is concerned. And in that timeline, you have less than a year. Is it realistically possible, the strategy that the mother body is now incorporating, bringing the ANC Youth League to try and garner the young voters?
Well, it's a legacy issue for this youth league that has been elected. I spoke to Fasia Hassan on the spot yesterday afternoon just to understand exactly that question. And her response was that, look, it is becoming more and more difficult to convince young people about the ANC because much of the failures that young people are experiencing, whether it's socio-economic failures, whether it's education outcome failures, whether it's questions of crime and violence in society that is visited upon young people, is partly institutional arrangements of the ANC government that has been there for 29 years that has failed. So we had a bit of a discussion about that. I do think that it's going to be a tall order. William, you might have listened to some of the Tripartite Alliance partners, for example, during Workers' Day, the likes of your Zingiswa Losi, and even a Jan 8 statement earlier in the year saying that it might prove difficult to convince workers to vote for this ANC given the outcomes, and how coming out blasting at the government and the president for, increasing salaries of public representatives, saying that it is tone deaf. So you have an ANC that I think, for me, has become paralyzed as a party in government, is trying to find all its machinery, traditional machinery, as an organization, but for as long as it's not solving its behavior in government and how it is perceived to be treating the broader citizens of South Africa, the taxes of South Africa, and stewardship over the resources that are available to South Africa, it's going to be difficult for the political party itself, let alone its other entities, the leagues and the Tripartite Alliance partners, to convince society about its viability as a governing party.
And of course, between you and I, Lukhona, this is just speculation, but what would, hypothetically speaking, the ANC Youth League tell young people in present-day South Africa that would convince them to go to the polls on their behalf in the new year?
Look, I mean, the campaign for Malatjie, Collen Malatjie, was ran around the slogan of economic freedom or death. And I've been interrogating some of these youth league people to say, why are you trying to borrow so much of this, radical language from other entities? Land or death was from the Black First Land First. Economic freedom, of course, has now been popularized by the economic freedom fighters, the EFF. And I think one thing, hypothetically, that will animate South Africans is if the Youth League is not trying to fight to wrestle the economic freedom in our lifetime statement from the EFF, but actually stand above those squabbling politics and propose ideas that can shift young people forward, but probably start doing work in communities with young people. There are many young people, William, in communities running community-based organizations, already doing things to hold up space in their communities, whether it's caring for the elderly, whether it's a refurbishment of libraries, whether it's ensuring that they tutor those who are in primary school and so on. So young people in this country are not just sitting idle. They might be unemployed, but it doesn't mean that they are all unproductive. They are actually very productive. And there needs to be ways of thinking about ideas to recognize that productivity, to remunerate that productivity, to ensure that productivity turns into livelihood and is not just charitable work in communities. And therefore, I think this Youth League must lessen its preoccupation with the EFF and whether they stole the 7 cardinal pillars and so on, which is something that I think is a massive blind spot because that horse has bolted.
And of course, these are internal politics that you also find in the mother body that have cost them the position which they now are enduring in the public's eye in South Africa. Not very confident people, not very trusting of the ANC. Lukhona, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. That was political analyst Lukhona Mnguni.